What do Germans teach about World War II? Do they even talk about it? And do Germans think that Nazi jokes are funny?
Don't mention the war.
Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany with our family, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. I am a huge history buff, and particularly World War II has always been one time period that I find great interest in. I was like most American teens growing up playing video games like Call of Duty or Medal of Honor, and some of my favorite movies were The Great Escape or Saving Private Ryan. Like many Americans, I grew up listening to the stories of my older family members who fought in the war or at least lived during it. It became a dream of mine to get to Europe and specifically to Germany to see these locations firsthand that I had always learned and heard about. Well, in college, I was given the opportunity to study abroad in Germany and live with a German family, and I was so excited to be able to hear a totally different perspective on this era outside of the American bubble, where we learn about the war with an inherent patriotic pride and bias. However, I wasn't sure if it was acceptable to bring up World War II in Germany. Years later, Aubrey and I moved to Germany, and I have now gotten about 5 additional years to really discover this country's complicated past and how Germans deal with it today. And what I've found has been both fascinating and surprising.
Getting a little uncomfortable with the Hitler stuff.
Wie verbreitet sind diese Hitler-Memes so an den Schulen?
Ich denke schon, dass es an wirklich jeder Schule ein Problem ist und fast in jeder Klasse.
In a YouGov survey from 2024, people from different countries were asked who they believe contributed most to the defeat of Germany in World War II. Unsurprisingly, an overwhelming majority of Americans believed that the US played the biggest role in winning the war. But when I came to Germany for the first time in 2014, this was the first time that I was confronted with the idea that not everybody sees it the same way. In fact, the same YouGov study asked Germans the same question, and Germans are quite split in who they believe played the biggest role in defeating Nazi Germany. So really, this was the first shock I had with learning about the German perspective on World War II, but still, one of the biggest questions I had was, do your average Germans talk about World War II?
Will you stop talking about the war? Me? You started it?
Ach, man kann gar nicht genug darüber sprechen.
Manchmal denke man, es ist zu viel des Guten. Immer wieder, immer wieder, immer wieder.
Of course, I don't just walk up to random Germans and ask them about their experiences, but there are some of our close friends and neighbors who, over time, I have been able to build up a relationship with them enough to find out. For example, one of our neighbors are an 80-plus-year-old German couple who don't speak any English that have become some of our very close friends. Much to my surprise, they have been very open about their experiences about growing up during the war. They've told us stories about their fathers being taken prisoners of war by the Russians, showed us the stack of censored postcards that their father would send them from the POW camp, their first memories of Americans driving tanks through their village, and what Reconstruction was like after the war. One of them actually had a bomb dropped on their home as an infant, and he's told us all about their family's experience during that period. I've gotten to the point in our relationship where I've asked them point blank if they have had any bad feelings towards Americans, because after all, having a bomb dropped on your house would be grounds for some anger, I would imagine. But what has surprised me is their almost need to talk about this time to let me know how much disdain they had for Hitler, for example. Almost like they have the opposite concern that maybe I will judge them as Germans from that period. Now, in terms of Germans our age or younger, when we talk about the war with them, it is a very different feel. Talking about the war with them can almost feel like we are just talking to an American our age about the war. They feel much less connection to it than our older German friends, and we often hear them say, we had absolutely nothing to do with that, just like you didn't, so why should I feel personally responsible just because I'm a German? But overall, as we've built these relationships and have been able to have these conversations, it hasn't been nearly as taboo of a subject as I expected, with a big part seeming like the distance in time they feel from that period, or an almost a feeling of needing to let us know they also don't like what happened in that time. Just like I was surprised Germans talk more openly about the war than I expected, one thing that in particular shocked me about Germany and their confronting of their past is how many TV shows and documentaries you will find that covers events from World War II on German television.
Unser Hitler-Jugendführer könnte man eine Platte auflegen lassen.
Da vorne steht jemand mit ein paar Papptafeln in der Hand.
In the US, there's so much patriotism and pride built on winning the war, it's really no surprise how much American media surrounds this period. But with the idea that not only did Germany lose the war, but also the horrific atrocities that happened in their country, it was kind of surprising to me to see how much media I see that is German produced about the war. At almost any time, I can flip on German television and there will be some sort of documentary or show about the war. Or I somewhat recently watched a German drama about a German and American love story when Americans were stationed in Germany right after the war. But from what I have observed, it seems like Americans and Germans come at this type of media from a very different angle. In the US, the focus is a lot more on celebration and patriotism, whereas in Germany is a lot more educational rather than entertainment, perhaps. Not always, there are some purely for entertainment as well here in Germany. However, Nazi jokes. This type of humor seems to be an issue that on one hand seems to still be found as taboo at times in Germany, but at other times not totally off limits. Surprisingly, I've heard Germans themselves make jokes like calling someone a Grammar Nazi.
Der muss das ja irgendwo gehört haben, weißt du?
Ja, leider.
Seit wann bist du denn so ein Grammatik-Nazi?
Or famous clips of Germans tricking crowds of Germans into shouting old Nazi slogans.
Zicke-Zacke, Zicke-Zacke! Zicke-Zacke, Zicke-Zacke! Hip, hip! Hip, hip! Sieg!
So this is where I would like Germans to comment their thoughts on this subject in the comments below. As the war gets farther and farther removed from us in time, have you felt like jokes like Grammar Nazi or Soup Nazi are starting to actually become more acceptable? Or is this sometimes a case of we can make those jokes, but you can't?
Not so for you!
Was wissen Sie über Hitler und den Nationalsozialismus?
Aber ich glaube, wir tragen eine Verantwortung, das was irgendwo verhindern, dass sowas wieder passiert.
Besides just media educating Germans about their past, for example, police officers in Berlin are required to visit a concentration camp during their training. Schools in Germany do not require students to visit a memorial site from the Nazi era, but the number of schools that are organizing such trips is nevertheless increasing. A German artist, Gunther Dimnich, developed Stolpersteine, or stumbling stones, and in front of the homes where a victim of the Nazis lived, he will install brass blocks that will bear the name of the victim, where they were born, and what ultimately happened to them. You will find these all over Germany and many other European countries as a constant reminder of what happened in people's neighborhoods and cities. Besides just educating themselves, Germany also makes sure those that want to become Germans understand the weight that must be carried and recognizing the past of this country. When I was in my interview for German citizenship, I was asked to explain the importance of knowing what happened in Nazi Germany, and I had to go in depth explaining the crimes and how it must never happen again. Many questions on my citizenship exam was also centered around this particular time period.
Seid ihr stolz, Deutsche zu sein?
Nein. Deutschen können nicht stolz sein auf unsere Geschichte.
Nur weil es so lange her ist und jetzt keine persönliche Schuld mehr hat, glaube ich nicht, dass man jetzt einfach sagen kann, es war ja keiner.
In an almost opposite way of the American patriotism that is drummed up when discussing World War II, Germans show their memory of the Nazi regime today by their lack of displaying patriotism. Outside of the World Cup or Olympics, it can be viewed as almost taboo to show any national pride.
Darf man die deutsche Flagge auch abnehmen oder kauft man die mit?
Das sind die Nachbarn. Die rechte Hälfte ist frei.
Wir teilen uns das Haus mit Nazis.
Jetzt hör doch mal auf mit deinen Nazis die ganze Zeit.
Du hattest doch selbst neulich Schwarz-Rot-Gold auf der Backe.
Ja, das war zu EM. Das war EM-Feeling.
When Horst Köhler left a plum job as head of the International Monetary Fund to become Germany's president in 2004, he said in his speech, "I love Germany." Reuters reported at the time that this simple sentence sent a hush through the packed Reichstag's chamber. Now, first off, Germany didn't get a chance to develop deep national patriotism as it only was really united into one country in the mid to late 1800s after hundreds of years of local and regional patriotism was already deeply ingrained. Then, after the nationalistic overly patriotic and fascist reigns of the Nazis, Germans do not want to appear overly zealous about their country and in a way be associated with that dark period's mentality towards Germany. Then again, the country was only just reunited in the early 90s, not really giving the country time to even develop deep patriotism for this newly shaped and formed nation according to some experts. But still, a major reason Germans don't display a sense of pride in Germany is because of the wounds Nazi Germany left on the psyche of this nation.
Darf eine Straße den Namen eines Rassisten tragen?
Nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg ja auch Menschen mit Straßennamen geehrt wurden, die wir heute möglicherweise nicht mehr in diese Kategorie setzen wollen.
One thing that shocked me and surprises many Americans visiting Germany for the first time is how many memorials are found around Germany for the fallen soldiers during World War I and II. This is in nearly every city and village across Germany. Now, in the US, there are debates all the time over whether or not certain statues or memorials should remain standing because of controversy over who those memorials might be honoring and what they stood for. So when I arrived in Germany and found that nearly every village and town we went to has memorials to German soldiers, I was initially very surprised to find them. What was initially shocking about them is the fact that these often have soldiers on them that are wearing a uniform that we as Americans just associate in our minds with the enemy and the bad guys. In a way, it was initially surprising to see a monument with this imagery that felt almost like it was honoring a horrific regime that was responsible for murdering millions, regardless of the true historical connections to this form of uniform.
I'm currently standing in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and here's an example of one that I find really interesting, that it's worded as "your heroes," actually.
From what I've observed, Germans also seem to have a bit of internal conflict over how to deal with issues like this. For example, there are many street names around Germany that are named after people who had Nazi connections. In cities across the country, there is a debate about whether or not they should be renamed, with many arguing both ways. In Schwäbisch Gmünd, right next to the column honoring the German soldiers of the world wars, they have a plaque that leads you through questions about this memorial and whether or not it should exist, which I find is another fascinating way in which Germans seem to address their past and show that they are willing to have discussions about it. On it, there are questions like, is it still appropriate to commemorate fallen German soldiers of World War I and II today? Or can it be stated with absolute certainty that among these soldiers to be commemorated, none partook in war crimes? So again, I want to know from my audience, what do you guys think should happen to memorials or monuments and street names in Germany with potential Nazi connections?
Wir können nichts dafür, unsere Kinder nicht, unsere Enkel nicht.
Hitler hat für das deutsche Volk viel getan und war nur dann schlecht, dass wahnsinnig geworden ist.
Most of this video, I have discussed how open Germans are about their past and how vigilant they seem to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I have to be honest and say, I still have questions about whether those sentiments were completely drummed out after they lost the war. In my head, it doesn't check out that Nazis who fought so fervently for the cause would suddenly stop being Nazis and wouldn't pass some of the ideology down to the next generations. And in fact, I believe I do see some evidence of this at local flea markets. There's a city not too far from us in Saarland that has a massive flea market that takes over an entire section of the city every first Saturday of the month. But one thing that has taken me by surprise is there have a lot of times been at least 2 or 3 tables set up where people are selling authentic old Nazi memorabilia. They will have old knives with swastikas, old uniform parts, helmets, even busts and portraits of Hitler. I once went into an old antique shop and talked to the German owner for a while. He was telling me about how he refuses to sell Nazi items, but how often little old ladies will bring in Nazi items they still have. I asked him if he is even allowed to sell these items, and he said technically yes, he is, but he isn't allowed to display them. So at these flea markets, for example, what they will do is put electrical tape over the banned symbols like swastikas or over Hitler's eyes so they are on display, but you know very well what it is underneath these things. But it makes me think though, how many people still have their grandparents' items like these in their homes? Are people buying them purely for the historical nature of them, or are there alternative motives? So do any of our German viewers have insights into how common these types of things are still to exist in some people's homes? To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is, what was your favorite childhood toy? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in my next video. First video in 4 months. Let's see how we do. It hasn't been nearly as taboo of a subject as I 1, 2, check. Hey. Hey.